Good afternoon, and welcome to the ANNA Administrative Spin presentation of the ETC model. Thank you for joining us. Allow me to introduce our speakers for this presentation. I am Wendy Lester. I'm the nurse manager of the outpatient dialysis unit at UC San Diego Health in San Diego, California. I've been in a variety of roles in the nephrology area, but my passion is adult hemodialysis. And I'm also the current chapter president for the San Diego chapter of ANNA. We also have Marianne Newman here tonight. She's been a nephrology nurse since 1982 and has been in hemodialysis outpatient management since 1997. And she's currently the nurse manager in Fresenius Kidney Care in Albany, New York. Also joining us is Cassie Bolduc. She has 23 years experience in both inpatient and outpatient dialysis. Most recently, Cassie worked as an advanced practice provider in an outpatient dialysis unit, and she's currently on a travel assignment in Florida. And finally, Ursula Chester has 8 years of nephrology nursing experience with acute dialysis, inpatient, in-center, and transplant. Ursula has served the roles of charge nurse and clinical coordinator while employed by Fresenius. She currently serves as the leader of the administrative spin. She was previously a best practice advisor and chapter secretary for Gulf Coast chapter in Houston. And a quick note, Ursula just passed her NP board, so we're all very, very proud of her.
Thank you.
So none of the speakers have any disclosures or conflicts of interest, but before we start, we'd like to get an idea how familiar you all are with the ETC model. And I believe we have our first polling question. Moderator, can you please display our first polling question? So I'm going to read it for people who are not able to see the screens today. And the first question is, how familiar are you with the ETC model? And the responses are very familiar, moderately familiar, or I know very little about it. And we'll give you a few more seconds. All right, moderator, do we have any results? Okay, so here are our responses. 8% of you are very familiar with the ETC model. 31% of you are moderately familiar, and 62% know very little about it. So that's good. We're going to speak to people. Hopefully we'll learn something new tonight. We're really excited about that. Okay. I'm trying to move on to my next picture here. Hang on one second. Okay, so here's our presentation objectives for tonight. We hope that at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to describe what the ETC model is and the expected outcomes. We also hope you'll be able to identify your role in the dialysis unit to achieving the ETC model outcomes. And again, at the end of this presentation, we hope you'll be able to state one risk of not meeting the broad goals of the ETC model. And the learning objectives for this presentation is that you will have an increased engagement in working towards meeting the outcomes of the ETC model. So we all know that both home dialysis and transplant modalities have support amongst healthcare providers and patients as preferable alternatives to in-center dialysis. But utilization of these therapies has been less in the United States than in most other countries. And so the End-Stage Renal Disease Treatment Choices model, or that's what it's called, the ETC model, is an innovative payment model that aims to see whether greater use of home dialysis and kidney transplantation for Medicare beneficiaries with end-stage renal disease will reduce Medicare expenditures while preserving or enhancing the quality of care furnished to beneficiaries with ESRD. So that's what the ETC model is. Well, let's look at the background for this and why CMS developed this model. So as of 2018, the US rates of home dialysis, and that's hemo and PD combined, was at about 12% of all dialysis patients. So only about 12% of patients who need dialysis are on any kind of home therapy. The rate of functioning transplant of prevalent ESRD patients is at about 28.9%. And new patients or incident patients who are preemptively transplanted account for about 2.8% of patients. So this slide is showing an international comparison of the yearly percentages of prevalent patients using some form of dialysis as of 2018. And again, this is hemo and PD combined. And you can see that other than Japan, the United States trails behind many other nations in home therapies. If you look all the way to the bottom there, Hong Kong, 73% of their dialysis patients are on some kind of home therapies. And we are at about 12%. So it's quite a significant difference. And this slide is showing the yearly percentage of ESRD patients living with a functioning kidney transplant as of the end of 18. With the exception of Australia. For some reason, I cannot find data past 2016. But again, you can see that with the exception of Japan, the United States also trails pretty significantly behind many other nations in this realm in terms of patients with functioning kidney transplants. So let's review the costs associated with end-stage renal disease and how much Medicare spends on patients with end-stage renal disease. So of all the beneficiaries, all the Medicare beneficiaries, are only about 1% of those beneficiaries have end-stage renal disease requiring dialysis. However, those ESRD patients account for more than 7% of Medicare payments. And additionally, more than 75,000 patients are on a transplant waiting list. So of all the patients who have Medicare, only 1% of them are patients who require dialysis. And yet they account for almost 8% of all the Medicare payments. So it's a significant amount of money that end-stage renal disease patients require to take care of them. So this ETC model proposes to save approximately $23 million over the course of the model period. And I'm now going to hand over the next part of the presentation to Mary Ann. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wendy, and thank you all for coming and joining us this evening. So my first slide here is going to talk about the timeline of this initiative. So in July of 2019, the Trump administration signed an executive order that would launch this initiative, and they called it Advancing American Kidney Health. The initiative goals were to increase earlier intervention in CKD and increase treatment choices for home therapies and for transplantation. It is directed at Medicare to develop and test the various payment models that would encourage these preventative care and to test them to see how they work for home dialysis and for kidney transplant. So in September of 2020, the final version was released, as you can see, September 18th, 2020. And it was aimed then at incentivizing providers to place more dialysis patients with end-stage renal disease, either to home dialysis or to refer them for kidney transplant. And what's important here is that you have to at least refer them. So the duration of this payment model then ends June 30th, 2027. So we've got, we're already a couple of years in, and we've got about 5 years-ish left to go on this. And if you think of your own dialysis life, you can sort of think about what it's like to get your folks to home dialysis and to get them referred for transplant sometimes. So we'll have the next slide, please. So in this ETC model, the initiative, as I said, is to look to prevent kidney failure through better diagnosis, better treatment, and better preventative care. And also it seeks to increase affordable alternative treatment options, education, and hopes to then increase kidney transplants by having modernized transplant systems and updating and getting rid of anything that's counterproductive to that. So what this slide is talking about is that we are trying to ensure that Americans developing kidney failure is reduced by 25% by 2030. And that 80% of our new kidney failure patients are either on home dialysis or receive a transplant by 2025. Now, we're only 3 years away from that. So we've got a lot of work to do in the next 3 years. We'll go to the next slide, please. The interesting or the scary thing about this is that of the 32% or the 2,400 facilities selected, the participation is mandatory in this. There is not an option to opt out. So CMS decided who was going to be in this, and he looked at the Northeast, he looked at the Midwest, at the West and the South, and they decided which facilities got to be part of this initiative. And no one had anything to say about it. You didn't get to say, oh, well, you know, maybe can we do it next year, or maybe not right now because my staffing is bad. CMS didn't care and isn't planning to care. You're part of it. And every year you get a new letter telling you that you're still part of this initiative. Next slide, please. So this slide talks about the exclusions for patients to be able to participate. So they have to be enrolled enrolled in Medicare. That's why CMS it's a Medicare program. Since this is a Medicare program, they have to be enrolled in Medicare Part B as their insurance, as anyone who gets has Medicaid or 100% Medicaid cannot participate. They have to reside in the United States. This is not for a pediatric population. The patient cannot elect to go to hospice care, palliative care. This is for end-stage renal disease only. This is not for AKI. Interestingly, the patient cannot carry a diagnosis of dementia. And I believe that has something more to do with their capability of agreeing to be, referred for any particular portion of therapy. And they also cannot participate if they live in a skilled nursing facility. Next, please. So what would exclude someone from transplant portion of this model? Well, they have to be under 75. They, again, cannot elect hospice. And again, they cannot live in a nursing facility. Interestingly, in addition to a kidney transplant, they could get kidney liver together. And as long as it's kidney something except pancreas, they can be part of this model. But they can't be older than 75, elect to be hospice, or live in a nursing home. Next, please. Okay, so for home dialysis, the modality performance score, otherwise called MPS, and exclusions. So all participating facilities will have their payments adjusted based on this modality performance score, or MPS. The model adjusts Medicare payments on certain dialysis and dialysis-related claims for participating ESRD facilities and providers. 2/3 of the modality score comes from successfully transitioning someone to home dialysis. So it has to work out, right? So you can't get somebody transitioned from in-center to home hemo and have them not do well and have to go back to in-center. They have to be successful. They have to be on home hemo and home dialysis in order for that to be true. CMS modified the definition of the transplant weight as the sum of transplant waitlist rate and the living donor transplant rate. So since dialysis units per se could not influence how many patients received a kidney transplant, they can only influence how many patients are referred. So the important distinguishing factor here in these, for both things, home dialysis and for transplant, are the words successful transition for home dialysis and referred and listed for transplant, and not necessarily completely transplanted. So with that, I will transfer the slides over to Cassie, and thank you very much.
Moderator, I believe we have a poll question at this time with Wendy.
Thank you. So the question is, in your dialysis unit, how involved are the nurses in identifying patients who could perform a home modality? And your choices are: 1, the nurses talk to the patients about home modalities on a regular basis in your unit. Identifying patients is someone else's role. Or, I don't know what the ETC model is, so we're not doing anything. I'll give you a few more seconds, 5 more seconds. Okay, and moderator, do we have some responses? We do. So 85% of you are saying that the nurses talk to patients about home dialysis in your unit on a regular basis. 15% of you are saying that identifying patients is someone else's role. And none of you are saying you don't know what the ETC model is, so we're not doing anything. So that's good. We're happy to hear that. And I'm happy to see that the nurses are doing a lot about talking to patients on a regular basis about home therapies. That's awesome. Okay, we can close that question. We're going to go to the next slide and we're going to hand it over to Cassie.
Okay, so let's talk about some things that we can do in our units. The roles and responsibilities for the dialysis unit staff. There are several things that we can do. We can educate our patients about the benefits of home dialysis. We can provide educational brochures. We can show real-life videos of patients performing home dialysis. We can also invite our current home patients to share their experiences with our interested patients. This gives the opportunity for them to actually see it, and then they can talk about and dispel any myths or misconceptions that they may have had about what home dialysis really is. And it's so important to work as a team to create a culture that supports patient choice, patient empowerment, and engagement in their care. Next slide, please. So let's talk about educating the patients about the benefits of home dialysis. So as you saw from our poll question, the responses that we got, 85% of the nurses are going around and they're having conversations with the patients about treatment modalities, transplant, home therapy, in-center. You develop a relationship with these patients, the nurses, the techs, the social workers, managers, dietitians, everyone there develops relationship with their patients. And so you are the ones, the frontline staff, that are able to recognize patient readiness, are able to kind of pick up on those cues during the conversation. Oh, home therapies may be a better fit than coming in center 3 times a week. Someone just had a grandchild in the next state and is talking about moving or talking about spending more time at home or watching their children at home, and maybe in-center isn't the best fit for them anymore. those conversations, the chit chat that you have with your patients while you're getting them ready and putting them on, you're going to pick up on little cues for patient readiness. Understanding too that there are many obstacles to be overcome. You can't just snap your fingers and walk right into home therapies. There are obstacles to be overcome. Some are misconceptions, and some are actual obstacles to be discussed and to find solutions for. And to be able to discuss the different treatment options with your patients. So by preparing yourself and being able to answer those on the fly questions like transplant list, how long is the workup? What is the workup? Will I have to go to the dentist? Are they going to take out all my teeth? Those conversations with your patients. So being able to, arming yourself with some information and being able to answer those questions on the fly, or to say to them, I'm not really sure at this moment, but I will get you that information. And so and there are some places that we can look. So next slide, please. Showing your patients real life videos of patients performing home dialysis. So there's a lot of misconceptions about what home dialysis looks like, because all they've seen is the treatment center, the big, huge machines taking up lots of floor space, all these liquids that you're carrying, all the liquids, the bleach, how are they going to do this, the water that they hear about all the time, the constant beeping of the machines. Is that what it's going to look like at home? What is it? So there's a lot of preconceived notions about that. So able to show them some live videos of patients performing home dialysis so they can have an understanding of what it really looks like is a great starting point, is a great stepping stone for those conversations. Next slide, please. Invite your current home patients to share experience with interested patients. So having them watch a video or read a brochure or find something on YouTube, those are always options, but everyone learns differently, and everyone is different in the way that they're comfortable with social experiences. Some people are very social and want to have a one-on-one conversation with someone. There is or could possibly be kind of a mistrust with a medical community too. They don't want to hear it from a provider. They don't want to hear it from someone who hasn't lived it and isn't experiencing it. They want to hear the real story, the true story from someone who has to do it every day. So it's great if you have someone social who is able to meet with someone and have those conversations. Now, with the current COVID-19 restrictions and our patients are immunocompromised, what does that look like? And I'm sure that's always changing, but we can facilitate Zoom meetings. We can facilitate masked up 6 feet away across the room meetings with patients. We have options in the time of COVID-19. It's not as easy as it used to be, but we have options. Next slide, please. Very important to work as a team to create a culture that supports patient choice, empowerment, and engagement. It really is about the entire unit, the entire culture, because everyone, like I said, develops a relationship with these patients, and people are going to pick up on different things, and knowing who your resources are. If a tech picks up on kind of some patient readiness, then have that conversation with the nurse. Or if a nurse picks up on patient readiness, but the patient is more conversant with their favorite tech, then equip your tech with all the information that they need and all the different resources that they'll need, and start the conversation there. Patients' lifestyles and the values, matching those with your treatment options. If they're able to come to dialysis 3 times a week and they don't want it in their home and they want to go to a place, get it done, and have it out of their head, then yeah, that meets their lifestyle. But if they would like to spend more time at home, then it's definitely an option for them. Looking for those teachable moments with our patients. So when are they open to having that conversation about treatment modalities? Consider every patient a home patient, instead of this person's not going to be able to cannulate. This person lives in an apartment on the 3rd floor. Those things are definitely barriers, but they're not exclusions to home therapy. So making sure that you consider every patient a home patient, and then work the process from there, work them up from there to see if they are appropriate and it does meet their lifestyle and they're capable. The do not, so that's kind of the do not. So don't exclude them in your head. Or rule them out for certain things. They have 6 cats. Those may be one of those obstacles, one of those barriers, but that doesn't mean that it can't be worked through or found a solution for. Next slide, please. So the educational brochures for your patients and families. So utilize your company brochures and leaflets. A lot of times there's stuff in the waiting rooms for people to go through and for them to encourage them to take them. So many times they look at them and then put them down, encourage them to take them and share them with the people in their lives and share them with their support system so they can have those conversations about, what do you think? I guess in-center, I guess coming here 3 times a week is not our only option. So encourage them to take them with them and review them. Explore the ESRD network sites. There's a lot of different network sites. The ESRD National Coordinating Center, the American Association of Kidney Patients, AAKP, American Kidney Fund, the Home Dialyzers United. There are several resources out there for people who are more tech savvy and want to get on their computers or on their phones and look up this information. Next slide, please. Increasing the transplant rate. Most important thing, refer, refer, refer. Refer everyone, even if you think offhand they're not appropriate. We can leave it to the transplant team to evaluate them and determine appropriateness. So it's really important, just like home therapies. Everyone could be considered and evaluated for home therapies. Everyone could be considered and evaluated for transplant as well. Educate your patients about the benefits of transplant, how it could change their lives, that it is a possibility for them. Encourage the patients to call the transplant centers. Transplant workup is a workup. It's a lot of things, and it can be very, very overwhelming. So encourage them to have an open communication, open line with the transplant centers, and meet with their transplant teams regularly. They don't want to be lost to follow up. They don't want to be, well, I had my first dental appointment, but I haven't heard from the transplant team in 4 months. Meet with them regularly, ask them where you are in the process and what the next step is. Next slide, please. Increasing that transplant rate. How do we do that? Building those trusting relationships demonstrates sincerity and empathy. Like I said, you have relationships with these patients and you care about them. So just show that you care about them. Ask them how they're doing and having those conversations about, I know that workup can be scary. It can be intimidating. So how are things going? What's going on in your head? What are those barriers? And just getting that out there. Maintain open communication with the staff and with their providers. Help those patients identify members of support system that they've not previously considered. A lot of times they think it just is someone who lives with them, but it doesn't have to be. It can be anyone who's available to be your support system, emotionally, physically able to take you to appointments, and an accountability partner too. That is important to consider when you're looking at your support systems. Encourage patients to discuss their concerns with the staff. Just like I had said, if they are overwhelmed and they've kind of let an appointment slide or they've let some follow-up slide, let them know that they can call the transplant center. They have questions about anything, they can always call the staff. They can set up an additional appointment with the social worker or case manager, just to have those conversations, so they're not alone during this process. Next slide, please. All right, I think at this time we have a poll question before I switch to Ursula.
Okay, thank you. So the last question is, in your dialysis unit, how comfortable are you about talking to patients how to get on the transplant list? So the first one is, I am very comfortable talking to patients about transplant and I have lots of resources to offer. Second choice, I'm intimidated about talking to patients about transplant because I do not know a lot about the transplant referral process. And the third response could be, I never talk to patients about transplant. That's someone else's job. Okay, moderator, do we have any responses? All right, so our responses, wow, okay, 73% of you are very comfortable talking to patients about transplant, and you have lots of resources to offer. That is wonderful to hear. That's great. About 20% of you are a little intimidated about talking to patients about transplant because you don't know a lot about the transplant referral process. That's a very reasonable thing to feel. And 7% say, I never talk to patients about transplant because that's someone else's job. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, Mary, and Cassie, for the information you provided. So now I'm going to get into the consequences of not meeting ETC model goals. The particular slide that you see on the screen comes directly from CMS website. And so they have developed a scoring and a penalty system that's very complex. But just for the purpose of this presentation, we're not going to get into details about that. But I highly recommend that you go to CMS website. They have plenty of resources on this particular topic if you want to know more information about how the payment system works. But to make a long story short, bottom line is just based on, they're going to be either positive or negative payment adjustments based on each dialysis facility's ability to improve their home dialysis rate, to improve their, increase their kidney, patient on kidney transplant list, and living donors transplant. Next slide. So again, just more on the consequence of not meeting ETC model goals. This just kind of gives you an idea of how each dialysis facility can be affected. But I mainly want you to focus on the negative adjustment. So this ETC model project, as I already mentioned by Mary Ann, is over a 5-year time period. So you see for each year, for the first year, if you don't meet your goals, you can have a negative 5% adjustment, a negative 6% adjustment, a negative 7% adjustment, and then it skips over 8 and a negative 9% adjustment. So at the end of 5 years, if you still have not met your goals, you could have a negative 10% adjustment. So what we're going to do on the next slide, we're going to show you what that means in terms of money. Next slide. Okay, so for right now, a current ESRD PPS rate is $257.90. So just imagine if you have 100 patients in your facility that all are Medicare beneficiaries, and you take that rate times 13 treatments, that comes out for each patient $3,352.70. And then when you add that all up for your revenue for the month, you have $335,000. And keep in mind that you need to use that money to pay for your overhead of the rent for your facility, utilities, bill, dialysis supplies, and salaries. Next slide. So keeping in mind the previous slide of what overhead and bills you have to pay, you look at this slide and you see for the first year, you have a 5% negative adjustment. So the first year you're looking at a possible $200,000 penalty. And then there you'll see for each year for 6%, for 7%, 9%, and then in your 5th year, if you have not met your goals, you can have a 10% negative adjustment, which is $400,000. And at the end, that could add up to a total penalty over 5-year period of $1,495,042.80. And that's a very critical and significant number, especially during a time in our economy where everything is going up with from the rising costs related to the pandemic, and now more anticipated rising costs from with gas prices going up. So definitely this big number helps you to understand monetarily why it's important to meet your ETC model goals. Next slide. So in summary, the ETC model is an innovative payment model that aims to test whether greater use of home dialysis and kidney transplantation for Medicare beneficiaries with ESRD will reduce Medicare expenditures. So 1/3 of all in-center hemodialysis facilities are included. And in-center hemodialysis facilities, as I've already stated, may be penalized up to 10% on all payments for not meeting certain goals over the 5-year model period. So now we're going to open up for, can you go to the next slide, look at our references. And now we're going to open up for any questions that our audience may have.
Okay, so I am seeing some questions in here. Will we get a copy of the slides? I'm not sure if that's something ANNA will release. Moderator, do you have any comments on that?
Yes. So we will be posting the slides and the recording of this presentation, and it will be made available sometime next week. You will receive an email once we have everything posted, and you'll be able to watch this again and download a PDF of the slides.
See another question, how do you deal with needlephobia? Pamela, maybe you could expand that just a little bit in regards to what? In regards to getting somebody to go home if they're afraid of needles? Just help me with that question just a little bit, please. If you can type it in or you can answer live, whichever you prefer. Going home. Anybody want, I can give it a shot, or does anybody else have a straight up answer they have here? The same way we deal with it with patients in center. You know, we try to teach them buttonhole technique and the proper way to do that to prevent any infections. We talk about the use of any creams that might be important. If they have a partner that can, you know, get particularly good at it. Or maybe if we can keep them away from home hemo and not worry about needles, we can steer them towards peritoneal dialysis. But I think that's pretty much the same way everybody deals with it in center or in any, you know, non-ETC model. It does make you a little more nervous when you have somebody that doesn't really want to go home and you know that you're going to have a negative impact if it doesn't work out. So it, you know, I guess probably makes you work a little bit harder at it, which is probably not the best answer, but it's probably reality. So thank you for asking. Debbie Helinsky had a question. How will CMS track home therapies and transplant directly from EQRS, or will data come through our EMR systems? Wendy, do you want to take that one since you were working with the data?
Sure. Yeah. So CMS is not technically tracking that through EQRS. It's coming from the claims, the UB40 claims that are submitted through either home dialysis facilities or from transplant facilities. So once a patient is requiring dialysis, you know, your charges come from your billing people. They submit them to CMS. If it's coming from a home dialysis therapy, they will submit it from the home dialysis therapy center. And so they're tracking them through charges and through bills, basically. So there is no data in EQRS that I'm aware of that's going to help them with this, because your EQRS data will just have patients who were on dialysis and then suddenly you're not reporting on them anymore. So that doesn't help them. So my understanding is that it is going to come from the claims that are generated from whatever therapy the patient is currently on, whether that is transplant, because once a patient is transplant, the transplant facilities are required to submit paperwork to CMS to say, look, this patient got a transplant. Similarly with home dialysis centers are also eligible to bill for certain things for maintaining patients on home dialysis. And those are the claims that CMS says, sees, I'm sorry. And so that's where they're getting this information from.
Thank you, Wendy. Debbie was also asking, what about the wait list part? Debbie, can you expand that just a little bit?
Yeah, what I'm not quite sure what you mean there, Debbie.
Are you referring to the fact that sometimes it takes patients a long time to actually get wait listed?
I don't see anything
don't
else
see
coming
it.
in. I think the other piece of it also is that facilities do get credit if your patient is actually on the transplant list. So even if they're not getting an actual transplant, because as Marianne alluded to, dialysis facilities have really no control who gets an actual transplant or not. But certainly we have some control with who we refer. And so if a patient is either has received a transplant or is actually on the active wait list, your facility will get credit for that. And that was fairly new in the original model. That was not the case. But in the right before the model went into place, or very close after it started, CMS acquiesced and said, okay, we will give you credit if patients are on the wait list, because they do understand that the wait list can be several years depending on your blood type, of course. And so it was not fair to penalize facilities. If we're getting patients on the transplant list, it's not fair that we're being penalized. And so CMS will now give credit for both. So I think that's hopefully that answers your question, Debbie. You don't get credit while they're in the workup process. They actually have to be active on the transplant list. Not just getting a workup, because again, a patient could take a year to get a workup, but once they actually get on the transplant list, on the wait list, that's when you start to get credit for your facility. And so that's why it's important to work with your transplant center and with your patient to make sure they are following up with all their tests and they are getting things done, or you're kind of finding out what are the obstacles, what's stopping you from getting, have you not done some tests that they want you to do? How can I help you get that test? And so it's sort of a collaborative effort. You're helping the patient get this done so you can get them on the wait list because it's the right thing to do. But the other piece of it, of course, is that being on the wait list does give you that additional credit. You do get credit for being on the wait list. I hope that answers your question. If not, please submit something else, Debbie.
Just to build on what Wendy said, it sort of supports what Cassie talked about as being partners with your patients. For many years, to get a patient on the wait list or on the transplant list, it was almost completely their problem. We referred them, we got them there, and after that, the transplant, at least in my experience, the transplant team would give the patients a list of tests that they needed to have done. You have to have this test and this blood work and this, you have to have your teeth pulled and your gallbladder out and do all that stuff. And it was totally up to them. They did not want the dialysis facilities to help the patients in any way, making appointments for follow-up, getting them, to understand anything. And as you can imagine, it took forever because patients would sort of sit back and say, yeah, Cassie mentioned I haven't seen anybody in 4 months. Yeah, I'm sort of waiting for them to call. But now, because we're working as partners with our patients to get them to do the things that they need to do to be able to get active on the waiting list, I think that has made a big difference in being able to have these patients wait listed and finally transplanted.
I agree. Yeah. See, I don't see any other questions at this time. Moderator, are we missing any questions, or I think that's it?
I do believe all the questions have been addressed.
Okay. Well, we thank you for participating and listening to us tonight. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and inspired you to go out to your dialysis unit and start seeing what's going on there in terms of referrals for home or talking to patients about home, talking to patients about transplant. It can be quite overwhelming, we understand, but there are a lot of resources out there, and we've outlined some of these on the slides, and there are a lot more in place. These are just a handful that we have utilized for this presentation. But at the end of the day, like anything else, there is a money piece to this, and CMS is looking to save money. We did talk about how much money is spent on these patients. And so they are looking to save money on this program, and this is what they believe may help. And again, this is just a model program. It's a 5-year, and they will look at the results and see where we are. And then I guess there will be something new after that and more to come. But again, we hope you've enjoyed the presentation tonight. And I think that is it. I think we are at the end of the webinar. Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.